So chapter 6, how to script the DOM with JavaScript. Of course, DOM means, anybody? What's the DOM mean?
Document object modifier.
Model. Document object model. So what it is, it just kind of lays out everything in the page, and you can go through and manipulate some of the stuff. So the objectives applied: develop DOM scripting applications that work with forms and controls, including applications that add nodes to the DOM. Use Chrome's developer tools to view the changes that JavaScript has made in the DOM. Knowledge: describe the use of the DOM in JavaScript applications. Describe these properties of the node interface for the DOM: parent node, child node, first child, last child, next element sibling, nodeValue, and textContent. Like I was saying yesterday or the day before, a lot of this is like a rehash of some of the CSS stuff we have done. It's just a matter of taking your time, thinking about how this stuff lines up with the parents and the child, first child, last child. We've done some of this already in CSS, so a lot of this won't be new to you. Describe these methods of document interface for the DOM: query selector and query selector all. We've been using those for a while now. Describe these methods of the element interface for the DOM: has attribute, get attribute, set attribute, and remove attribute. We haven't done too much with this, so we'll go over this a little bit. Explain how the DOM HTML specifications simplify coding when compared to the DOM core specification. Describe how to use the classList property of the element interface. Describe the use of a form that has a submit button and a reset button, something we're all familiar with. Describe the use of text box, text area, select, radio, and checkbox objects. Describe these methods for working with forms and controls: submit, reset, focus, blur, and select. And like I said, especially towards the end of this, we've done a lot of it already, so we'll probably cruise through the end of it fairly fast. Come Tuesday, I'll get a feel on how everybody's doing in these labs and that, and more than likely I'll code out another one. I'm not going to tell you which one, but it'll probably be at least one or two of the other ones. And just, to me, sometimes this can be the most confusing part, just because of the parent and the child and the nodes and all that stuff, just making sure you understand all that. Even though you don't use it a whole lot in the real world, it's still nice to know. Describe the process of using the append child and insert before methods of the node interface to add nodes to the DOM. So the code for a web page, you can see here we have the doc type HTML, the head, the HTML, the title, head, close, body, H1. Let me take this out of there because it doesn't fit with this next layout. So we have a form with some stuff in it. We have a label, an input, a span down here, closing the form, closing the body. So when you look at this, you don't see much. You see a bunch of elements in that. But when you look at it through the DOM, it lays out to like a flow chart on how all this stuff works and how the DOM's held. So you can see here's the document object model for that web page we just looked at. It says Chrome JavaScript engine. That's what Chrome uses to run JavaScript. We won't mess with it in here. We don't care about it in here. When you get to Mr. Gubbins' class, he goes into a little bit more of this because you guys use Node.js over there, and Node uses this Chrome JavaScript engine to run its stuff. So when you look at this document object model, it breaks down into a tree of hierarchy. It starts with your HTML. That's the main root of your document object model there. So you can see our HTML, the doc type in HTML, that's our root. That's the top part of the tree. The HTML has a head and a body tag in it. So those are the next two that you would see down. So we have our head and our body. In that head we have a title. There's our title. And then that title has text in it, so that's a text node in there, this join email list. So there's the text there. In our body, we have an H1, and then we have a form, and you can see we have our H1 here. Our H1 has some text in it. Please join our email list. That's our little text node down here that's in the green. In this form has some different elements in it, and all these blue ones are elements. The green are text nodes. So if we look at our form again, we'll see we should have a label in there, an input, and a span. Here's our label inside our form, an input inside our form, and a span inside our form. And you can see our form closes, so those are all children of the form element. And you can see a label, and our label has text in it. Email address, there's our text in our label. The input is just the input itself, and then the span, that span has text in it. It's this little asterisk, but it's still text that's in that span. So that's how you look at a document object model. So you see you got your root, the children all underneath the parent, the root, and then the little text nodes there to wrap it all up. If you put some meta tags in here, you could put them in under the HTML. If you have more elements in the body, divs, things like that, you would put them under the body, and then like inside the form you'd have more in the form if you decide to put more things in there. I think they got pretty much everything you could put in there. And then maybe a button, they could have put a button or something on here if they wanted to. And so that's how you would look at this document object model. It's just a tree structure, starts with your root and just follows it all down the branches till you get to the text ones and there's nothing left, and it ends it there. So the DOM nodes commonly used: document, of course, document.get element by ID. There's element, the attributes, and text. And we've used all these already, so these shouldn't be anything too new to you. Some of the properties of the node interface. So the node interfaces, you have parent nodes, child nodes, first child, last child, next element sibling, node value, and text content. We've worked with all these at one time or another, or pretty close to them all, doing the CSS stuff when we had the parent elements, and then we had to dig down through and get the style of one of the child elements, and you had the first child, you could do the last child. These work the same way. So a parent node property returns the parent node of the specified node in the tree. If there is no node, it will be null, and the root of the document will always be null because there is no parent of the root. It is the top of the hierarchy. A child node property returns a live node list of all the child nodes of the specified node, including elements, text, and comment nodes. It allows access to all types of child nodes, even non-element ones. First child property returns the first child node of a specified node. There are no child nodes, it returns null. It's useful for quickly accessing the first item in a list of children. So under a parent node, if you go get the child nodes, you can go grab that first node by using this first child. Last child property returns the last child node of the specified node. Like first child, it returns null if there are no child nodes. This is helpful for accessing the last element in a sequence of children. Next element sibling. This property returns the next sibling element of a specified node, or null if there isn't one. It only considers sibling elements, ignoring text and comment nodes. So again, the element nodes are the ones we've been using in HTML, the paragraphs, the divs, the unordered list, the list items. Those are technically sibling elements or elements. You got node value. The property represents the value of a node for text, comment, it returns the text content of the node. For other node types, node value is usually null. And then finally, text content property returns the text content of a node and all of its descendants. It's a quick way to retrieve or set the combined text within an element and its children. Unlike nodeValue, it works on the entire subtree, aggregating the text of all child nodes. So if you use this text content, it will change it in all the elements, not just a specific one that you're trying to change. HTML span with 3 child elements. Here we have our span tag, and then the 3 child elements. And it seems weird calling them child elements instead of children for some reason, but you have your span, that's the parent, and then the 3 child. There's a bold tag here, there's an underline tag there, and then finally we have the italicized tag there. So that's the 3 child elements in this little section here. How to get an element object for the span element. And this is, we've been doing this for the last couple chapters. They create a constant variable, they name it span, and do this document query selector span. If you did get element by ID, I mean, yeah, technically you could. You'd have to assign an ID to the span and get it that way. It's a little bit easier, a little bit cleaner doing this query selector. And again, JavaScript is trying to go away from that get element by ID and use this query selector more often than not. So then in our next example here, they do create a constant, call it bElementText, and as we saw earlier, was it chapter 4 with the objects? So we have our span here, which is this query selector, document.querySelector span. So we're using this object here, and we're saying get the first child of the span, and that first child is this bold tag, and then it says get the second first child of the first child. And that's why I said some of this can get confusing the way they start stacking these on. But they're just saying, go get the span tag, get that first child, and get the first child under the bold tag. So here's our parent, there's the first child, and this is the first child of the first child is this welcome text in this bold tag. And then they get the node value, and that node value again is this welcome text. So as crazy as this looks, that's what they're trying to do here, is just walk through that DOM, walk through this span, and go grab these elements one at a time by using these child elements. So here they're going to get the underline part. Are you getting ready to sneeze? So they declare a constant variable. They call it uElementText. And again, because we set up that span object, the span's the parent, that's what we're going to start with, is getting this parent first, the span. We get the first child, which is that bold element. It's the first child under span. Then it gets the next sibling element, or next element sibling. Well, the next element sibling after our first sibling is this underline element here. So span, first child, next element sibling gets us the underline. The first child of that next element sibling, the first child of this underline is the text again, this back. And then they get the node value, and then they pull the back, that value of back. So it would actually pull that text to back, 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 back. So if you were to print out this uElementText, you would see the word back there, since that's the word they're trying to pull out of there. And then here we have a constant iElementText. So then they do span, and then they go get that last child. Well, we know the last child in here is this index, or the italicized span. I'll get it right. So instead of saying span, the first element, next sibling element, next sibling element. It saves you a lot of time, and you can just go to the last child, get that last element. That first child of the last child is the little exclamation point in here, and then they get that node value for it. That node value saying grab whatever is in here, which is the exclamation point. And so they go grab that, and it will display this console log. They get this B element text, the U element text, and the I element text. They concatenate it all together with the plus signs in this log, and it displays welcome back with the exclamation point. So that's how you would walk the DOM with these first child, next element siblings, and the node value ones. And like I said, it can get confusing unless you use it a lot. It's hard to remember all this. Like I said, with our textbooks, the internet, a lot of it you'll still have to keep referencing. I've been doing it 24, 25 years, and I still have to go out and reference a lot of this stuff because you just don't use it enough in your everyday coding to remember what all this stuff is. That's the CSS properties. There's 100 and something properties of CSS. And unless you have a photographic memory? Photographic memory, you're not going to remember all that stuff. And especially if you don't use it every single day, you will never remember it all. And I guarantee you, most of you, when you leave class, don't code outside of class, just from my experiences with students. You do or don't?
I do.
Do, yeah. And like I've said at the beginning, you have to put time outside of this class to get good at this stuff, to help you remember it, to get practice on it. You just do the work in the class, you'll be C, D, F student just working in the class. You do an hour outside of the class each night at home, you should be a B or C student. You do 2 hours more every night at home, and you should easily be an A student or a B student in here, depending on how well you pick it up, how much complication you get into it and stuff like that. So yes, you do need to work on this outside of class to really get good at it, to get comfortable with it.
That's why we have something called homework.
Yeah, and how many of you actually do it as homework? Yeah, I don't see many. Oh, I see one hand.
Hey,
Sean, I'm sure.
My computer broke.
Yeah, I'm sure Nia does too. But so here with this text content that we talked about earlier, this text content will change everything. So here they do a span text, they do a span, they do a text content, and they log the span text, and it displays the welcome back sign. They didn't change anything with it, they just pulled this text content back out of all of it. So in the span here, it just goes finds these text nodes that are in here and just pulls that text back out of that span. How to set the text of a span element's first child element. So here you can see they say span dot first child text content. So what was that first child? Anybody remember what the first child was?
The B element?
Yep, the bold element. So that's the first child of our span, is that bold element. The next sibling element would be the underline. The last element is the italicized. So here they're saying go grab the span, go find our first child in there, and then go change that text content to hurry in it. So in this example it said welcome, because we went and grabbed this first element here. We grabbed that first child element and changed our text content to hurry. When we display out that span text content now, it changed it from welcome back to hurry back because we set this text content in it to hurry. So it just goes and gets our span, goes and finds that first child, and says go take that text out of there and change it to hurry for us. How to set the text of a span element. So here we just do span text content. So this will take everything in that span, any text in the span, and as we can see in our example, we have welcome back exclamation point as our text in this span. Well, now it says go change all that text and just make it say hi. So it replaces all the child elements with the text node. You print it out, span text content. All we get back now is hi, because that text content, when you set it on the parent element, it changes the text nodes and all the children to say what the one thing is it says. This one above, we specifically said go get that first child and change it in that one, and that's why we left the back exclamation point on here. It's because all we did was go find that first child, go change the text of it to hurry, but we left the rest of it alone. Here we took the whole span and set that text content to it and changed it to hi, so then it removes all that hurry back exclamation point and just leaves us with hi. Does that make sense? Common methods of the document and element interfaces. We've been working with these forever. The query selector, you select what you're looking for. Query selector all, select what you're looking for. That query selector all will grab all the elements, all the classes you're looking for, and we'll put them in an array, and you can walk through the array, and I think they're going to have an example or two coming up in here, and we will see it when I do the code along here in a little bit. So common methods of the element interface: has attribute, get attribute, set attribute, and remove attribute. And again, the attributes are like the src and an image, the href and a anchor tag. It's anything that has an attribute and an equal sign. When you see that equal sign, you know it's an attribute, and it's going to assign some kind of value to it. So here it has attribute. It just checks to see if it has an attribute and looks for the name that you give it. The get attribute will actually pull the attribute back for you to use if you need it. Set attribute, you can go reset it. You can give it a name and a value that you want to set. So like, you can go check to see if your image has an attribute set to it, an src attribute or an alt attribute. And I think in one of these labs you'll end up doing something like that. So you check to see if it has the attribute, and then if it does, you go reset it to something different, like with an image. So here you would say what attribute you want to set and the value you want to give it. So if your image has a source attribute, you go set the source attribute here. So you do something like src, and then you would give the path to where that image is, and then it would set your image for you. I think they have some examples in here, and I think you do something like that in your labs. And then again, remove attribute. If you want to get rid of the attribute, you can just do the remove attribute off of it. So we could do like span, remove attribute. I don't think our span had any kind of attribute in it, no. So if we had like an ID or something like that, we could remove it if we wanted to. If it had a class, we could remove it if we wanted to. And we will do some of that in these labs, so you'll get to see it and actually use it. And when I do my code along, you'll see it. So how to create an array of all the anchor tags, and this is kind of what I was just talking about. Create an array of all the anchor tags. You just do this query selector all. It pulls back all the anchor tags with it, and then because it's an array, you would access it just like an array. So you'd do something like links square bracket 0, and that would pull back our first anchor tag in our array of links that we created. An HTML UL element. So we have our UL element with an ID called image list. Here's a list item and another list item. Each one has an image in it. And what's this source here? What's it called? This is an attribute. Yep. So when you see something like that with an equal sign, an href with an equal sign, class equals, those are all attributes. So whenever you see that in an element tag with the equal sign, that's an attribute. So here they're saying our source is images lion, images tiger. And they're going to get an array of all the LI elements within the UL element. So they declare a constant variable. They name it list. They do the document.query selector. And the ID, it's an IDY. How do we know they're pulling an ID back? Hashtag, that's right. So they're pulling this ID back called image list. You can see up here in our UL there's an ID called image list. So that's pulling that back for us. They declare another constant called items, and this items they do list. List is the parent element. List is our UL here. Go into the UL and pull back all of our LI elements. So they go UL with that ID of image list, take that list, it's an object now that we're doing the dot notation. They're doing this method because it's a method, we can see the parentheses. So they're using this query selector all method, and the parameter, it's inside this parentheses. If you remember us doing the functions and methods and that, the parameters are inside the parentheses. So they're just saying grab all these LI elements that's under this image list and bring them back for us. So how to test for and get an attribute. So they say list, and that list again is our UL here. List has attribute, and it's looking for a class attribute. They can say list get attribute that has class in it. I don't see any in there, so it'd probably come back as a null at that point. How to set an attribute. So now they're saying list, and this list that we created here with that query selector image list, create a class and give it the name of open. And you can see here where they're setting this attribute. Here's the name and the value. So our name is class, the value is open. And so if we have a style in our style sheet called open, that's what it's looking for. And then removing it, you would just say list.remove attribute. List is our object, the dot operator. Our method is remove attribute, so it's going to remove an attribute. The attribute we want it to move is class. So instead of source here, if this was class, that's what would be removing, is that. But since it's source, it's not going to touch it. And we'll see how a lot of this works when I code out the FAQs one for us. The URL for the DOM HTML specification. At the beginning, it talked about the DOM HTML and the DOM core specifications. The big difference between those is that DOM core can be used for any scripting elements. So like if you were to work with XML sometime in your career, you could use the DOM core elements to go access stuff in XML. XML is the same thing pretty much as HTML. Most of it was used for holding data and stuff like that. So if you had a big form and you wanted to hold data in it, you'd have like XML, I think it was like 1.0, and then you'd have all these elements under it. XML, you can name your elements anything you want to. It does not matter with XML. So you could do like first name, and then you'd hold the first name in there, close the first name, and then you could have last name, and you could have all these elements going down just to store data for you. You could have one called zip code, you could have one called address, you could call them anything you want. It's just to store data in there. Do you have a question?
So it's just kind of like cutting out the middleman with the ID, like making it.
Yeah, for the most part. Yeah, so you can get pretty specific with these if you want to. Most of the time, you'd have something maybe like person or customer, and then you could reuse these, so then you do it again for customer, or you could write code that would just keep looping through and printing them back out for you each time and stuff like that. HTML, they got pretty specific ones, you know, with the paragraphs and the list and all that stuff. So the core one works good with XML. You can go and grab stuff out of there as you need it. The DOM HTML specifications is strictly coded towards HTML, so it makes accessing the HTML elements a lot easier than using the core. Take a look at this real quick. It's funny, I look at this sheet and the first thing I think of is this is what old school web pages used to look like before they started styling them and stuff like that. So application of core DOM, the naming conventions. So you can see this goes on quite a bit. Some pretty dry reading. If you're bored and want to put yourself to sleep one night, give this a look over. We're not going to go into it. I'm not going to bore you all with that. That you can mark under homework. That'd be homework, Carter. Yeah. Yeah, read it all. Put yourself to sleep. Typical properties available with the DOM HTML specification. So you have elements, you have all elements. They have an ID property, and the attribute is the ID attribute. You have the title attribute. You have class name, that's the class attribute. Set multiple class names. You separate the name with spaces. So if you use multiple class names, and I think we do in our, we use the parent-child, so we don't use multiple though. But just like we did before, when you're using class names, you put the comma in between them. Tag names, the name of the tags, div, h1, h2, a or image. The anchor tag, the property for the anchor tags are usually these hrefs like I was stating earlier. Image ones have the source and the alt, and then input has disabled. So these are some of the HTML DOM specifications that you can go access and manipulate with JavaScript, walking the DOM and that. And as you get more into your coding career, you will hear the term walking the DOM quite a bit, because that's what you do. You start up at the root level and you just walk down the tree, the DOM, to go find what you need and manipulate it the way you need to manipulate it. So here's how you can spawn the DOM HTML specification, simplify your code. So you can get and set an image tag source attribute with the DOM core specification. So the DOM core specification, you create a variable, constant, name it image element. Going to go tell it we're going to go get the ID of image. So if we look here, the ID image there, so they say go grab that. Maybe not in our example, I thought it did. Is that an element? ID image, so we don't have the ID set on that exact example, but alert, they do an image element get attribute source, so they're going out and grabbing the source here, which is going to be this lion image. There's the source. Get that attribute source, and then assign our image element. They're going to set the attribute on that source. They give it that lion JPEG image. With the DOM HTML being set strictly for HTML, here they do an alert. They do image element dot source, and just do image element source, and then assign it the lion JPEG. So you can skip a step or two with using the DOM element compared to the DOM core specifications. Like I said, you don't see this a ton out in the real world. Other examples of using the DOM HTML specification, how to get the ID attribute of all the first element in an array. And this was kind of what I was telling you earlier. For the links, they go grab all the anchor tags from the links, and then they do first link ID, and then they do links 0. So they go out to the array links and go get that first element 0 and say bring us the ID back for that first element in our array. How to get the href attribute of an anchor tag. So they do a constant, name it target, say go get the ID first link, and then get the href attribute off of there. How to set and get the class attribute of an element with 2 names. So they do go get a div, and again there's no hashtag or anything there, so that's the element itself. Go get the class name off that element, and we have open and plus, so there's 2 of them there that it's getting, and then class names div, and then class names here. So they put that open and plus in there with that. Other examples using the DOM HTML specifications, how to get the tag attribute of the first element in an array. So you do links, query selector all, get all the anchor tags. You have the anchor tag, go do the links, your array, get the first element and get the tag name. And we told it to go get all the anchor tags, so we know that first tag name is going to be an anchor tag. A lot of times you'll do this with like the children ones and then go dig through and find out where a specific child is located or which one it is and go pull it back. But like I said, you don't see this used a whole lot in the real world. How to disable and enable an element. And again, we've been doing this with some of the forums and stuff since the beginning. They get the element, disable it equals true, disable it equals false. Dot disabled should just do it without having to put true behind it. Another property of the element interface, you got classList. So this classList just makes a list of the classes, and we'll see that again when I do this code along for the FAQs. Common properties of the DOM token list are length and value. And so you check the length, you can get the value. Common methods of the DOM token list object. You check and see if it contains a class name. You can add a class name, remove a class name, replace a class name with an old one and a new one. I think one of our labs we do some of that. And then toggle class name, and we will do that in this FAQ one. And I think, yeah, we do use remove in it. We check to see if it has. We don't do it contains, we just do it has. So we'll look at a lot of these as I go through this FAQ code along. And then next week, like I said, I'll get a feeling for how the class is doing, and I'll probably end up doing another 1 or 2 code alongs just to make sure everybody's comfortable with this, especially after coming off a 3-day weekend, making sure we're all on the same page and understanding this. So an HTML label element, there's an H2. This is a CSS class called first. Welcome to our website. How to get an element object for the label element. So they do heading 2, document query selector, go find the H2, which is here. Heading 2, class list, add blue. So whatever is in this class, we have first here. Now they're saying add blue to it. So we would see class first and blue then, since they added this CSS class to it. How to replace a CSS class with another CSS class. So they do that heading 2, get the class list, replace. They replace the blue with the red. So if we had a style sheet with the class blue and a class red, it would just switch them. And then if we want to get rid of that red, we would just do class list, remove red. Like I said, we'll see that class list and stuff as we go through some of this. How to toggle a CSS class. I toggle it to blue, and we'll look at that. How to check for a CSS class. It says contains, does it contains blue? If it does, add a bold class to it. And that class list is just a way of accessing the classes that are in your DOM. Document object model. Of course, that's the whole DOM that we were talking about. The node is just one piece of it, so you have element nodes, text nodes, stuff like that. DOM core specification is more for XML and HTML, but not HTML specific DOM work. Interface, just typical interface, how you interact with it. DOM scripting is writing code to walk through the DOM, and that's what we're kind of doing now with this JavaScript stuff, is DOM scripting. And then DOM HTML specification just means the document object model. The specifications are aimed more at HTML elements instead of the core specifications. So here's the FAQ. We'll take a look at this. I'll bring it up here in a minute. So here, the JavaScript event handler for the click, each H2, and all this is documented in the actual code that you will use for it. So I'm not going to go over it yet until I bring mine up and we start looking at it. So HTML, or here's for a form. I think they have that mail list one, or they have one where you have to register for something and it validates it to make sure you put the right information in. And like I said, we can take a look at those Monday or Tuesday when we get back. Just, I know a lot of people, especially over a 3-day weekend, will do a brain dump on a lot of this stuff and try and enjoy their weekend. Attributes of the form element. They have the name. We set the name in a form a lot of times. An action, what you want the form to do, and a method on how you want to send it back to the server. Terms related to forms. Form, you got control or field, and that's just our text boxes, radio boxes, check boxes, all that stuff. Submit buttons, reset buttons, and data validation. Almost any time you create a form in HTML, especially going forward, you should do some validation on it. The real world, you'll definitely have to do data validation here. We're not too picky about it, I don't think. I know this one of these labs in this chapter does make you do validation on some of it, but that is a habit you should get into, is doing data validation on all your forms. Anything somebody can put data in, try and get in the habit of putting data validation behind it, just to keep your code from breaking, making a bad experience for the user. It seems like if they have a bad experience on a website, a lot of times they won't go back. I know I'm like that. If I have issues on a website, I'll try and go find something else to use instead. Property of text box, text area, and select objects are values. So it's the values that are put in the text box, text area, or select object. We've been using those since we started working with forms and HTML. HTML code for text box, text area. I'm not going to go too much into this. This is just kind of covering your labs and homework. Like I said, we'll go over some of this next week. Commonly used with forms is submit, submit in your form, reset in the fields in your form. That's the reset is a nice thing to get in the habit of. It's kind of a pain when you have a giant form though to have to go set all those fields for reset. 3 methods that are commonly used with controls. The focus sets the focus on the element. So if you have a form and usually you set your focus on the first element in the form, the first field in the form, you do it with focus and that will set it for you. Blur means when you move off the text box, it's considered blur, and that will fire something for you if you want it to. Or select, if you use select, it will highlight that text box you have select set on, and then if you want to just copy the info out of it or delete it, you can use that select. I think one of our labs in the last chapter had us doing something with the select. Common control events, focus, blur, click, double click, change, and select. We should be pretty familiar with those by now. Anybody got a question about any of those? They're pretty common working with forms. Statement now uses reset and submit buttons, just like we've been doing all along, doing our forms, nothing new there. An event handler for the change event of a select list. So here they create a variable constant, give it the name investment change. They do an anonymous arrow function here since there's no name behind it. They run a method called calculate click, and it runs when it blurs. So when you remove the focus off the list or off the text box, then it fires. So that's what that blur does, is when the text box loses focus, it's considered a blur, and then it fires off for you. Event handler for the double click event of a text box. Same thing we've been doing. It just sets it to blank, clears out the text box. Event handlers attached to other event handlers. So you can see they do a DOM content loaded. Add event listener change. So if something would change in the text box, if you change some of the text, that will fire. Double click in the text box or wherever, it will fire. And then if it gets focus, it sets it focus at the very end. So whatever text box yours is under will have the focus set on it when it's done. Believe this is one of our labs we'll be doing. I think that's the second or third one that we'll take a look at in our labs for this chapter. I'll see how people do with that over the weekend, and maybe we'll take a look at that Monday or Tuesday. Form controls, that's for that app we just looked at. Create element, so they create a new HTML element. Create text node, they create a new text node. And I believe that's for a lot of this stuff here with the notifications that you need to add warnings in. See if it has them on here in the image. Yeah, so you'll end up putting some stuff in here. You'll end up putting some stuff in the contact me area. Append child node, so you can add a node to the as a child. Insert before, put the new one in there, and the existing one you want it before. You can replace a child, put the new one and the existing. Remove a child, whatever node you tell it to remove, whatever element you tell it to remove, it will remove it, and then the remove method itself. Buttons, that adds a new paragraph element to the DOM. This is what it looks like before the button is clicked. Click on add DOM, and that add DOM will put that last or the middle paragraph in there for you. To do that, they have this, we'll look at the code here. So you have first paragraph, second paragraph, an input type. The input type is a button with an ID of add. So they do add, event listener click. If you click on that add button, it creates a new paragraph tag. So they create a constant, call it new paragraph. And here's document.create element. So they're just saying create a new element, a paragraph. That's what they're going to do here, is put a new paragraph in there. Create a new text node and add it to the new paragraph tag. So then they create a variable constant called text, document create text node, and the text they're putting in there is middle paragraph, new paragraph, and they're going to append child text. So here's the new paragraph we created, that new element we created called new paragraph. They're saying append the child to it, and that child is going to be the text, so they're appending that text node to it. So then when we run it, that middle paragraph will pop up there for us. Get the first element in the document and its parent. So the first paragraph P, first paragraph is parent node. insert the new paragraph tag after the first paragraph tag, before the element that comes after the first paragraph tag. So they're doing insert before, they're inserting a new paragraph, the first paragraph next sibling element. So they want it, there's the first element and that's the next sibling element. So they're saying put it in the middle of those two. Insert before, first paragraph next sibling element. So put it before that last paragraph. Here's another text one. I think that's the same as that other lab we'll be doing later on. CSS for it, some of the updated JavaScript. So you can see they're doing a form reset, removing the unordered list from it. That gets rid of the error messages, and then they set the focus to the email address. So email address. Like I said, we'll take a look at a lot of this on Tuesday when we get back, just to refresh everybody's memory. Like I said, the last part of this goes pretty quick. The first part was the more in-depth part of this. So that's for chapter 6. Let's take about a 13-minute break. We'll come back at 9:15, and then I'll do the code along for the FAQ lab. Explain that as we code through it and show you how that all kind of works. So for chapter 6, exercise 1, it's the FAQ. FAQ lab. We're going to walk through it real quick and take a look at what they want and how to read this code that's going on here. So, if you, like I said, if you go out to your local repository, you should have book files out there. Click on the book files. There should be a JS file. Click on that. Inside there, there's book exercises, I believe it's called. You'll click on that and go to chapter 6, and there should be an FAQ folder in there. You can copy and paste that in your chapter 6 lab folder in your repository. You can just work out of there. I'll probably find it no matter what. I usually check both places when I'm trying to grade this stuff. So if we look at our FAQ, we can see we can click it, open it, close it. And the book says test and review. Open that up, see how it works, review its code. So looking at its code, create a variable constant called toggle, put an event handler on it, and they create a constant h2 element, and it says event current target. So this is going to get any h2 element that we click on. Another variable constant div element, h2 element next element sibling. So this is going to get the h2 sibling div. So if we go look at our code, we have our h2, and it says next element sibling, which is the div, and that's what it's going to go grab is these divs here.
Can I dim the light?
Yeah, if it helps. And I will zoom in on this too. So that's what that's doing here. It's just saying create this toggle, have it go get the h2 elements when clicked, and then go get the divs of these h2 elements, the next element sibling. Go look. This div is the next element sibling. h2 next element sibling. h2 next element sibling. So that's what it's doing there. Whichever one you click on, that's where it goes and looks for that sibling. So here we got the class list. that we talked about. So it says on this H2 element that we created up here, get the class list. We're going to toggle it and toggle it with the minus. I think somewhere in here. There's our H2 minus. We're going to toggle it with that. Here's just our H2. And this one's going to toggle to open. And so we're just going to open these divs. We're going to add a class. They're going to open it. Here's our div open that they're toggling, and they're just going to display it block is what they're going to do. The div itself, the display is none, so we're not actually seeing anything at the moment. So when we go look at our page, currently it's a div. That div is not showing anything. That's why all we see is the H2s in here. We have this toggle minus, class list toggle minus. H2 minus, it changes the image. Minus is what that's doing. So when we click on this, you see that it goes to a minus, to a plus, to a minus. That's what our toggle is doing there. Our toggle open for the divs, we go look again, we got a div open. And so right now we just have a div. We just have them divs. And because they're just a div, our display is none. So because that div is a div, it's not displaying, it's hidden. So then when we do the toggle, we go to div open, and it's going to display a block, which means it's going to make it a block element. It's going to be seen. It's going to be out there. So now that becomes a block element. This is the div that becomes that block element with that open toggle that we just click on. So let's go to the next line of code. This event prevent default cancels the default of the H2 tags on the anchor tags. So if we look, these H2s have some anchor tags in here, and that's preventing the default of it. It cancels the default. Shouldn't be able to click on it to open it, but I've noticed the code does allow you to open it for some reason. So like that should not open and close, but it does for some reason. And then the next down, we do an event listener, DOM content load it. This makes sure the page loads before it starts doing anything. Once it does, it runs an anonymous arrow function, and it's an anonymous arrow function because there's no function name associated with it. And of course the arrow after the parentheses, that's the arrow function that it's running. So it's saying get the H2 tags, so it goes to FAQs. Dot query selector all, and it's saying go get the main FAQs and all the H2s under it. So if we look at our HTML, there's our ID FAQs, and it's saying go grab all these H2s under it. And we're going to add an event handler for each of the H2 tags. So here they do because these H2 elements now with this query selector all, that query selector all again makes them an array. So we're going to walk through this array here with this for loop. So for let H2 element of H2 elements. So it's saying each H2 element in our array of H2 elements, add an event listener, click to it. And when we click, we want it to do the toggle. Here's our toggle method up here, our function. That's what we want it to do. And then it sets focus on the first H2 tag's anchor tag. So here's H2 elements. And again, that's an array. This query selector all makes this H2 elements an array. This array is saying go get the first H2 tag, first element, the first child of it, and set the focus to it. So that H2 element, the first child of this H2 element, you can see H2 element, the first child of it is this anchor tag. And it's saying go get that first element, H2, first child, which is the anchor tag, and set focus to it. And it should, you can see it's got the focus set to it with that square box around it. It's saying here I am. We tab, the second one gets focus, tap down, the third one gets the focus. So that's why that black box is around there. It's got the focus set to it. So that's number one. We tested it, went through and looked to see how it works, reviewed the code. Number two, it says attach event handlers to the anchor elements instead of the H2 elements. Change the application so that the toggle event handlers are attached to the anchor elements within the H2 elements instead of the H2 elements themselves. So let's take a look at how we do that. So what we're going to want to do is we want to create another constant element up here. So we're going to say const anchor element, and we're going to make this the event current target now, because we're going to say now we'll click on these anchor tags and make it work. And we'll say get the clicked anchor element. That's the line of code we added so far. Just created a constant variable named a element, assigned it the value of the event and the current target that we want to set it to. You good with that, LeVay?
Yeah.
All right. All right, typing slowed down, so then we'll take a look at the second one. So now instead of this event current target here, we want to change that to a element dot parent element this is going to get the parent H2 element. So this H2 element, we just changed it to say, go get that anchor element, which is the current target, and go get the parent of it, which is the H2 elements again still. And then the constant div element, we don't have to do anything with that. We're going to leave that like it is. We're not going to mess with the divs. Oop, did I scroll out everybody's way? Everybody good with that?
You could just change out the development, I mean, H2 element.
What's that?
I'm just making sure I'm on the right track of it.
Okay. Well, I'm recording it, so
H2 element, right?
yeah. If I'm recording it, so when I put it out to YouTube or whatever, you can always go back out there and reference it. So, yeah, LeVay, do you have a question?
No.
Okay. So then the next thing we have to do is go down to our event listener down here, the DOM content, loaded part, and we're going to change this from H2 elements to our anchor element. And we want to get our anchor tags with that. So we will just add the anchor down there and say, get the ID of FAQs, grab the H2 of it, and grab the anchor tags of it. So it's kind of walking through the DOM. It's getting our ID FAQs up here, saying grab the H2s, grab the H2s, and grab the anchor tags out of the H2s. Everybody good with that? So now that we created this query selector all in our A element is going to become the array now. So now we got to change our array down here from H2 element to anchor element. So now it's saying on our anchor elements, click and do the toggle on our anchor elements instead. And then we have to set our focus down here to our anchor elements. And then if we save this,
Why is it not working?
not working. Make sure this says anchor elements here. I think I fat fingered it and left the S off. Is that what you're going to say?
I was like wondering why it was like not elements, and I was
Yeah.
like, you probably know there.
Yeah, I just forgot my S there. So if we save this and go out and look, it should still work. Now you can see we can mouse over it and then highlight the anchor tags. And now we took it off of the H2s and that, so now our pluses and minuses no longer work. We have to click on the wording itself for the anchor tag.
Is there a reason why it was working before?
It had it all hooked up, but we took it off the H2s, and because we didn't get specific with the H2s, we just said the H2 itself,
Yeah.
and that H2 had the text in it, so it just highlighted this whole H2 was technically workable. But we took it off of the divs and that the images that we had and stuck it just strictly on this anchor tag now is what we did with it. I think if we look, so you can see our anchor, we have hovers and stuff on it, so now when we hover over it, it highlights like it would an anchor tag. So you can see now it highlights since we activated the anchor and everything on it. So that's that part there. It says tested, everything still seemed to work good. Now comment out the statements in the toggle event handler that use the remove attribute and set attribute methods. Technically don't have the remove and set attribute methods in it, but we're going to comment out the toggle part and recode it how the book is actually asking for it. So we're going to comment these out here. And we're going to start out by doing an if statement. I'm going to say if h2 element has attribute, and the attribute we're looking for is a class, we're going to remove that class. So we're just going to do a remove attribute class. And then we're going to say else h2 element dot class name equals minus. Now we did the minus, so of course we're going to have to do one for the open. So if div element that has attribute, and the attribute we're looking for again is class. Element dot remove attribute, or remove class. Does it look familiar at all?
So this is a big confusion. What's the purpose behind this?
So we
It's
just,
the same thing.
yeah, we're just coding it out different so you can see how it works.
I just don't know where to pull it on.
Do you have to cut out the second one or no?
Yeah, we're going to have to finish this one out. So we're going to do an else on that. Div element dot class name equals open. You can go down here and comment this out. And just say elements dot focus. So by getting rid of this class list, we don't have a list of them anymore. So we can get rid of our the index off our array and just set the focus to the elements at that point. So now if we save that, you can see it still works as we expect it, toggles it. So we took a simple way of doing it and we expanded it and made it a little bit more coding, but just to show you how these has attribute, remove attribute, the class name stuff works, how the toggle works.
What was the last thing you wrote at the bottom? The element stuff.
Yeah, just dot focus instead of having to get the index. So you can see this classList.toggle, 2 lines there does 5 lines, 10 lines total. But that's how has attribute, remove attribute works. So it checks it, see if there's an attribute, remove it. And if there isn't one and they don't remove it, they say go put it in called minus. Same thing, the div, put it in called open. And nothing else down here really changed. It still walks through the array of elements, but because of the way we have it set up now, we can just set it on the very first element with that focus. That makes sense? Kind of a lot of extra typing to show how that has attribute, remove attribute, and class name stuff works. Parent element, next sibling element stuff there.
Still not really working.
So I'll stop the recording there.
Still not working.
I'll give Liam a hand.